Deep beneath the Pacific, something is moving. A vessel engineered to vanish inside the precise stretch of ocean Vladimir Putin depends on to keep his nuclear deterrent alive. Japan just commissioned its fifth lithium-ion stealth submarine, and what it represents is the most consequential shift in Pacific power in 80 years. And that one fact, more than any tank parked on Hokkaido or any fighter screaming off a runway, is the quietest and most consequential development in the Pacific right now. Because for the first time since 1945, Japan isn't just defending itself. It's building the precise capability that threatens the one thing Russia cannot afford to lose. The trap that was supposed to pin Tokyo down in the north has done something Moscow didn't plan for. It woke the country up, and the world is only beginning to understand what that means for the balance of power across the entire region. Watch until the end, because this story connects military steel to your money and reveals why every assumption about the Pacific just changed forever. The arithmetic being written in that cold water will determine where capital flows for the next decade. And this is the version of the story most coverage will not tell you. Now back to the water. Here's what you have to understand about that submarine, because the name sounds like nothing and the meaning is everything. The Japanese call the class Taige, big whale. The fifth boat, Choge, was commissioned in March at the Mitsubishi yard in Kobe and slotted straight into the fleet based at Yokosuka. 3,000 tons, diesel-electric, lithium-ion batteries instead of the old lead-acid cells. And if you're wondering why a battery chemistry matters to geopolitics, stay with me, because this is the part the headlines skip. A conventional submarine used to have a fatal tell. It had to come up or near up to run its diesels and recharge, and every time it did that, it became findable. The Taige boats narrow that window dramatically. They sit deeper, longer, quieter. They are built to loiter in shallow, contested, noisy water, and simply not be there as far as anyone hunting them can tell. Ghost subs isn't marketing. It's a description of the problem they create for the other side. And the other side, in this case, has a very specific nightmare. Let me draw the map the way the planners draw it, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. North of Japan sits the Sea of Okhotsk, a body of water almost entirely ringed by Russian territory, sealed off from the open Pacific by a long arc of islands called the Kurils. To Moscow, that sea is not a sea, it's a vault. It's where Russia parks the most important asset it owns, its ballistic missile submarines, the Borei-class boats that carry the nuclear weapons meant to survive a first strike and guarantee retaliation. The entire logic of a nuclear deterrent depends on those submarines being unfindable. A missile sub that can be tracked and killed in the opening hours of a war deters nobody. So, Russia built what strategists call a bastion, not a single line, but layers. Coastal missiles, air defense, patrol aircraft, fortified islands, all of it wrapped around that sea to keep the boats safe inside so they never have to gamble on sneaking out through contested water before they can shoot. The Kuril Islands are the wall of that vault. That's the real reason Russia will never hand them back, no matter how many decades of polite Japanese diplomacy go by. It was never really about fishing rights or wartime grievance. It's about the door to the bastion. So, what has Moscow done with that wall over the last few years? Reinforced it hard. Su-35 fighters forward based on the islands, Bastion and Bal coastal missile systems, the kind designed to sink ships approaching from the Pacific, S-300V4 air defenses to throw a dome over the whole approach. New radar, new infrastructure, a permanent garrison where there used to be not much at all. And under the surface, the Pacific Fleet has stayed busy. More than 20 submarines on the books, strategic and attack boats both, with task groups deploying out of Vladivostok and slipping back in. Just last month, a Russian flotilla that included a submarine came home from a months-long run across the Indo-Pacific. A 10-ship convoy threaded the Tsushima Strait. Bombers, Russian and Chinese together, flew a loop near Japanese airspace and put F-35s in the air to meet them. That's the picture from Moscow's side. Fortress North, pressure applied, Japan boxed in. Now here's the question that should be bothering you. The one that turns this from a defense story into something sharper. If the bastion is so well defended, if the wall is so thick, why does any of it depend on Japan staying weak? Because it does. And that's the trap. Think about Japan's problem the way Tokyo has to think about it. To the south, China. The Senkakus, the Miyako Strait, the constant pressure around Taiwan, carrier groups pushing past Japanese islands into the Philippine Sea. That's the threat everyone talks about, the one that gets the magazine covers. But to the north sits Russia, sitting on those islands, running drills, rehearsing the repelling of an invasion, keeping a second front permanently warm. And if you're Japan, a country with finite ships and finite submarines and finite pilots, the genius of having a hostile power to your north and a hostile power to your south is that you can never fully commit to either. Every destroyer watching the Kurils is a destroyer not watching Taiwan. Every submarine hunting in the Sea of Japan is one not waiting in the south. That's the alignment. Russia and China don't need a formal alliance to benefit from each other. They just need Japan, looking two directions at once. That was the design. Split the attention, hold the north cheaply with a few islands and a lot of missiles, and let Beijing apply the real weight down south. Keep Tokyo stretched, hesitant, defensive, constitutionally restrained. The same pacifist Japan it had been since the war. And for decades it worked. What changed is the thing nobody fully priced in. Japan stopped being that country. Let me put a number on it, because the numbers are the tell. Japan's defense budget for this fiscal year came in around 9 trillion yen, about $58 billion when the cabinet approved it. And the broader initial figure, counting everything security related, pushing towards 66.5 billion, that's roughly 1.9% of GDP, climbing toward 2% by next year. 12th consecutive record. Here's the line that should stop you. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, Japan's military spending last year hit the highest share of its economy since 1958. 1958. We are talking about a country reversing nearly 70 years of deliberate constitutional cultural restraint, and doing it fast with a 9+% jump in a single year. This is the part where you'd normally hear someone say the buildup is about China. And it is. But watch what they're actually building and where, because the hardware tells you the real story better than the press conferences do. Start with the missiles. In March, Japan deployed its first homegrown long-range strike weapon, an upgraded version of the Type 12 anti-ship missile. The original had a reach of about 200 kilometers. The new one, 1,000, 5 times the range. They put the first batch operational at a base in Kumamoto and another near Mount Fuji, and the protests outside the gates were real because the residents understood exactly what a long-range strike weapon does to a neighborhood. It turns it into a target. Defense Minister Shinjiro Koizumi stood up and called it what it is: counter-strike capability, not defense. The ability to hit an enemy's launch sites before they fire. For a country whose constitution was written to forbid exactly that posture, this is a quiet revolution dressed in bureaucratic language. And the next deployments? They're scheduled to push north, Hokkaido. By 2028, those 1,000-kilometer missiles and the hypersonic glide weapons that went operational alongside them are slated for the northern island. Look at a map and ask what a 1,000-kilometer anti-ship missile on Hokkaido can reach. It can reach the Straits of the Kurils. It can reach the doors of the Bastion. Now layer in the rest. Tomahawks. Japan is buying up to 400 American cruise missiles and integrating them onto its Aegis destroyers. The first of them on the Chokai later this year, with 7 more boats to follow, each one able to throw a strikeout to roughly 1,600 kilometers. Hokkaido itself is being hardened into a front line. Armored units, the Type 10 and Type 90 tanks concentrated up there, radar, electronic warfare, drones, and underneath everything, the submarines. The Taige program, 8 boats planned, 5 already in the water, each one quieter than the last, each one built for exactly the kind of confined, contested undersea hunting that the waters around the Kurils demand. You see what's assembling here? The Bastion's whole purpose is to keep Russian missile submarines safe inside the Sea of Okhotsk. The 2 developments most likely to crack that open, in the assessment of the people who study it for a living, are advances in anti-submarine warfare and the spread of quiet, capable attack submarines into the region. Japan is now building both at scale, with a budget at a 70-year high, and pointing the newest pieces straight north. The wall Russia built to pin Japan down is the same wall that now has Japan investing in the one capability that makes the vault behind it leak. That's the backfire. Not a slogan, a structural consequence. You wanted a hostile, stretched, defensive Japan to your south problem. What you got is a Japan that decided it could no longer afford to be defensive at all. And the first thing a newly offensive Japan reaches for is undersea dominance, because that's where its real edge has always been. Let me slow down, because the honest framing matters here about what this is and what it isn't. Nobody is saying Japanese submarines are going to go sink Russian boomers in the Okhotsk tomorrow. They're not. This isn't a war. It's a shift in the math of a war that nobody wants to fight. And that math is what deterrence actually runs on. The value of a Russian missile submarine sheltering in its bastion is that it's a guaranteed survivor. The moment a credible adversary fields enough quiet attack boats and good enough sub-hunting sensors to make guaranteed into maybe, the entire calculation changes. Maybe is expensive, maybe forces you to build more, hide better, spend more, worry more, and Russia is already spending. Its military burden last year was around 7.5% of its economy, $190 billion. A country pouring an enormous share of everything it produces into a war machine while its far eastern flank gets quietly outclassed by a neighbor it assumed would stay asleep. Which brings us to the wild card that makes the whole northern picture more dangerous, not less: North Korea. Because the Russia-Japan story doesn't sit in a vacuum. Pyongyang and Moscow signed a mutual defense agreement back in 2024, and it has only deepened since. North Korean troops, by some intelligence estimates close to 11,000 of them, have been fighting and dying in Russia's war against Ukraine, taking thousands of casualties, and in exchange getting something far more valuable than money: combat experience, battlefield data, and Russian technical help upgrading missiles, drones, and submarines. Russia, which once voted for sanctions on the North Korean nuclear program, has dropped its objection entirely. And in March, under Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's government, Japan was issuing emergency alerts as North Korean ballistic missiles went up. In April, Pyongyang fired missiles with cluster munitions into the Sea of Japan. North Korea has openly warned Japan against putting long-range missiles in the south, so picture the full board. China to the southwest, Russia to the north, North Korea between them, armed, emboldened, and feeding off Russian technology. 3 nuclear-armed neighbors, increasingly coordinated, applying pressure from 3 directions at once. That's the security environment Japanese officials keep calling the most severe of the post-war era. And they're not being dramatic. They're being literal. And this is where it stops being a defense story and becomes the thing that connects directly to money markets and the shape of the next decade. Because rearmament at this scale doesn't happen in a vacuum either. Japan is trying to roughly double its defense spending inside a 5-year window, a 43 trillion yen program. At the exact moment its government bond yields have been climbing and the yen has been under pressure, and the country is carrying one of the heaviest debt loads on earth. You cannot pour this much steel into the water without it showing up on a balance sheet somewhere. Somebody finances it. And the open question hanging over Tokyo is the same one hanging over half the developed world right now. How do you fund a war footing in peacetime without breaking the very economy you're trying to protect? Then add the American layer, because this is where it lands on markets directly. Washington, and specifically the current administration, has been leaning on allies to spend more, harder, faster. NATO members pushed toward 5% Asian allies told the free ride is over. Japan's surge isn't happening, despite American pressure. It's happening partly because of it. And that pressure is reshaping where defense dollars flow globally. American contractors selling Tomahawks and F-35s into Japan, co-development of a next-generation fighter with Britain and Italy, a program north of $1 billion this year alone aimed at fielding aircraft by 2035. Japan modernizing into a genuine offensive military integrated tightly with the United States, which means the US-Japan alliance is no longer one strong partner carrying one cautious one. It's becoming 2 power projection forces operating as one. That changes the risk premium on the entire Pacific. It changes the calculus in Beijing on Taiwan. It changes what insurers and shippers and energy traders have to assume about the sea lanes that move a staggering share of the world's goods. When you hear the most complex security environment since the war, what a market should hear is the cost of the old assumptions just went up and somebody is going to pay it. Let me circle back to that submarine because there's a detail in it that was deliberately held. Japan chose not to go nuclear with these boats. It could have pursued nuclear-powered attack submarines, the kind that can sprint across an ocean and stay down for months. It didn't. It doubled down on diesel-electric, on lithium-ion, on stealth and numbers over endurance and reach. And at first glance, that looks like a limitation, a country still hemmed in by its pacifist past. Look again. In the confined, shallow, sensor-saturated water of the Western Pacific and the seas around Hokkaido and the Kurils, a nuclear boat's advantages matter less, and a quiet, conventional boat's advantages matter more. Japan didn't pick the weaker option. It picked the option optimized for exactly the waters where Russia keeps its vault. That's not a country accepting its limits. That's a country that has thought very carefully about where the fight would actually happen and built the precise tool for that place. 8 of them planned, 5 in the water, 1 more launched and on the way. A production line that doesn't stop. And every hull that joins the fleet makes the math behind Russia's bastion a little worse. Quietly, without a single shot, without a headline, the way the most important shifts in power usually happen. So, was it a trap? The honest answer is more interesting than a yes. Russia didn't sit down and plot Japan's rearmament. What Russia did was assume Japan would stay the country it had been, restrained, divided, dependent, slow. It built a strategy on that assumption. Hold the North cheaply, lean on China to apply weight in the South, keep Tokyo looking both ways, and the assumption was wrong. The pressure that was supposed to paralyze Japan instead gave its hawks the one thing they'd never had, a public and a budget and a justification. 3 nuclear neighbors closing in is the most persuasive argument for rearmament anyone could have handed them. Moscow helped write it. There's a version of this where you'd call that ironic. It's the oldest pattern in geopolitics. You apply pressure to make an opponent fold, and instead the pressure forges them into the exact thing you were afraid of. The Kurils were supposed to be Russia's wall against Japan. They may turn out to be the reason Japan rebuilt itself into the one Pacific power that can reach behind that wall. And here's the piece that keeps the thread from tying off cleanly. None of the people who set this in motion, not in Moscow, not in Beijing, not in Tokyo, not in Washington, fully controls where it goes next. Russia can't undeploy from the Kurils without looking weak. Japan can't stop rearming without abandoning the case it just made to its own people. North Korea has every incentive to keep testing because every test buys it more Russian help. China watches Japan harden in the north and reads it as evidence it needs to move faster in the south. Each side's defensive move is the next side's reason to escalate. That's not a stable system cooling down. That's a system winding tighter, one quiet submarine and one record budget at a time. The markets will keep treating this as background, a defense headline, a regional squabble, a thing that happens far away in cold water, easy to dismiss and hard to price. And maybe that's the real and most unsettling story underneath the story. The most important shift in the balance of the Pacific in 80 years is being built underwater on purpose, where no camera can find it, while everyone watches the surface. When the most consequential weapon in a region is the one designed never to be seen, how do you price the risk of something you'll never be allowed to witness until it's already too late to react?